Cheeseman.
Whoa, Fear and Hunger 2 Termina, the super scary, super hard, really cruel meanie game for big meanies that like that kind of stuff. A lot of YouTubers carry on like this is the hardest game that's ever been made, and it's just not true. This game is difficult, but the difficulty isn't because of the fights are really complicated and the battle system's like, whoa, you really have to wrap your head around a lot. No, the game is just cheap as hell and likes to nutshot you all the goddamn time. Flip side is that this game has so many exploits and cheeses that we're going to pull the shirt over this bully's head and spank him until the difficulty curve looks like a joke. In order to prove my point, I'm going to do a run on Maso mode and kill literally everything in the goddamn game in one run. Why the hell not? So to kick things off, what's this game even about? Well, in a scary otherworld version of Europe during World War whatever, a bunch of strangers on a train are getting drawn to a mysterious town in the middle of nowhere. There's cosmic forces at play and lots of elder god trickery and shit going on, but basically all these people get drawn to this location, get thrown to a battle royale, they all murder each other in order to appease the scary moon from Majora's Mask. If you haven't seen the Japanese film from the 2000s called Battle Royale or read the manga that it's based on, you really should because it's goddamn awesome. But basically it's this. A bunch of people have to get together and kill the shit out of each other because the gods want you to, otherwise you get Kamehameha'd by the moon and get turned inside out. This run took me about 30 hours to complete and even more countless hours doing trial and error and just learning how the game screws you over in various ways. So if you want to see everything that took to do this, then buckle up because it's going to be a long one. First of all, we're going to be playing on the infamous Maso mode, or masochism mode, however you want to say it. This difficulty is notorious because it's such an asshole in the way that it plays out. So beside the obvious stuff like you're weak and the enemies are strong and there's more enemies and exclusive enemies and blah, the big problem with Maso mode is that you can't run around outside for very long, otherwise the moon is going to laser beam your ass right back to the title screen. This makes generally exploring and not knowing where you're going really goddamn difficult. If you forgot where something was, well, good luck with that. So first of all, routing is pretty important in this run. You don't really want to backtrack because in certain scenarios you'll completely screw yourself. By about the mid-game, the rare time is not as important because you've opened up so many shortcuts and options for traversal, but in the early game it's a real pain. In my mind, this kind of run breaks down to 3 crucial stages of progression. The first stage is getting off the train and getting all the way over to the orphanage where you can access the Hexen for the first time and actually level up and gain some skills. This first phase of the game I like to think of as the coward stage because we're going to be running away from everything with our tail between our legs. There's no fight that we can win without guaranteeing some damage or maybe getting maimed, and we really don't want that to happen. Once we've accessed the Hexen for the first time and actually got some skills for combat, the Gold Bros are going to smash it to shit and we enter into our next phase, the Ascension. In this stage of the game, we have to run around and collect these 3 keyed items which will unlock the church basement and get us into the northern part of town, where there's another Hexen table waiting and we can level up further. The nice thing about this part of the game is that we're actually somewhat formidable and we can take on a couple of bosses and kick some people's asses for a change. Once we reach the northern part of town and get to the Hexen table that doesn't get destroyed instantly, we enter into the third phase of the game. This final phase of the game is actually satisfying for a change because we'll have amassed so much power that we'll absolutely annihilate everything in our path. This includes all the enemies that we ran past earlier, all the bosses, the secret ones included that are hidden in faraway areas, all of the contestants of the Battle Royale, and finally, both of the gods that are pulling the strings in the background. Those being Rare, the moon god that's hanging out at the top of the tower, and Logic, the machine god that's squatting down in the basement of the White Bunker. Taking these two out will finally prove that the concept of God is absolutely nothing in comparison to a drug-addled, funny dancing man with a pocket full of broken glass. With all that being said, let's cycle back to the beginning of the game where we get to choose our character. Obviously, from the funny dancing man statement, I'm going as Osa, the yellow mage. It feels like the dominant choice for a new player trying Maso mode is either Jotaro Kujo, Levi the soldier, or Abella the mechanic. The logic being that Jojo can punch the shit out of early game enemies, Levi can shoot some bosses to death before you even have to fight them, and Abella can get her hands on the meat grinder really early on. Those choices are all well and good if I had planned to just beat the game, beeline it straight for Rare and zap him or whatever, but that's not my focus of this run. I'm here to kill everything and everyone. If I'm going to make that happen, I need to utilize the most overpowered aspect of this game, which is easily magic. Now it is true that other characters get access to magic eventually, and everyone can kill Osa in the later part of the game and steal his Spice Forge buff to be extremely powerful with magic, but that is in in the last third of the game, after you pass through the cathedral, and I'm impatient. I'd prefer to start zapping people a little earlier than that. The big drawback with Osar is that he doesn't like using guns, so no guns for me, and also I've got Nashra's burnt head in my back pocket who won't stop yammering. Now that we've chosen the Magic Man as our character, we're given the opportunity to lose the game before we even start it in the form of a text adventure prologue that only this character has access to. The big benefit to this text adventure is that our starting equipment is based on the outcome of this little story, so we can get ourselves 3 big benefits before we even start the game. 1. The Officer's Sword, which kicks ass. 2. A Small Things Amulet that increases our speed straight off the rip. And 3. The Skinning Bible of Grogoroth, so we can start working our way towards unlocking his spells, which will be the anchor point of our entire run. Now that the tutorial has ended and we're off the train, our main priority is to loot the shit out of everything in this forest before the rare timer starts after you pass 2 screens. For this reason, we take the right-hand path of the train off towards the fishing hamlet, since that forest has a lot more herbs to steal. Once we make it into the Moonscorched village, we avoid everything besides the 2 aggressive Moonscorched who we can bully into giving us their favorite coins. For the time being, combat is extremely dangerous because we're undergeared and far too slow. The way agility works in the game is whoever has the highest agility gets priority in the turn order in a battle, but also if you have over 50% of the agility of the enemy, then you get double turns and you're guaranteed to run away. Luckily in this game, there's only 6 enemies across the entire game who have higher than 10 base agility. So once we get to 16 agility, we'll always have double turns and we can always run away. The Small Things Amulet that we got from tutorial put us up to 15, but we'll still need that additional point if we want those benefits. There is always the chance that we'll find another Small Things Amulet while we ransack the town, but it's more likely that we'll have to buy it from the shop once we get into the town proper. In order to progress at the beginning of the game, you need to unlock the outer gate that leads to the inner city suburbs. To do that, you need either 2 keys, one from the bunker on the west side of town, and one from the mayor on the east side of town, get a pair of bolt cutters, or simply shoot it with a gun. Although the shortcut options are kind of my speed, in order to get the white bunker open so I can fight logic at the end of the game, I need to turn on the telectroscope in the western bunker, so no shortcuts for me. The first key we can receive for the mayor, as long as we're cordial enough during his little dinner date. He's quite friendly now, but he'd still flog us 3 ways to Sunday in a fight, so we'll be back to take his head off later. There's a fun little glitch we can exploit in the east side of the manor's mayor. We can climb down an invisible branch that we're supposed to grow by using the sigil of Venushka on the ritual circle above us. For whatever reason, you just click on this pixel and it lets you climb down. There is a piece of the fluted armor set down here which we will be crafting later in the game. On the way to the bunker on the western side of town, we run into the 2 headless dogs. These guys are so fast that you can't really outrun them without some serious juking, so instead I'm going to take the easier option of simply feeding them rotten meat during the battle in order to kill them relatively easily. The dogs will waste a turn eating the rotten meat, so you can slap them unaccosted. If you have more meat, you can feed them continuously and just kill them without getting attacked, but unfortunately I only had 2 pieces, so 1 piece per dog. Making our way into the Tunnel 7 bunker, this is usually where a new player would find Needles sawing Tanaka's head off, but since it's Maso mode, we have to deal with Abella's moon-scorched form, Chagna. Fighting this enemy at this point of the game without a gun to execute them is an absolute death sentence. Luckily, the bunker has quite a few juking spots and opportunities to break Chagna's ankles, so we're just going to make our way around them and go down the elevator. The corpse of the soldier down here in the basement has the key to the gate that we need. We also have the opportunity to turn on the first of the 3 telectroscopes that'll open the white bunker towards the end of the game. Once we make our way through the rare dimension shortcut and get spat back out in the forest, take the opportunity to kill the woodsman so I can rob his house. The woodsman is a pretty dangerous enemy this early on in the game, so we're going to use a bear trap to cut his legs off. Once his legs are destroyed, you can just slice his face immediately in battle and finish him in 1 blow. Killing the woodsman has 2 major benefits. The first is that the basement of his house is a ritual circle where we can use the Venushka sigil to grow a tree that has the pinecone pig on it. The second major benefit is we get the opportunity to saw this guy's head off and trade it in for soulstone shards later on. Just for context, the soulstone shards can be crafted into soulstones and they're essentially level up gems. They allow you to buy new skills. Unfortunately, in the bleak world of Termina, gaining power comes at the cost of hearing the grisly sound of a hacksaw cutting through someone's spine and snapping their head off very often. Particularly in this run, where by the end of the game I had taken so many heads that I'd broken over a dozen bone saws. With the Pinecone Pig now in our possession, we can head back to the village and unlock the gate that blocks our access to the center of town. Since we weren't lucky enough to find a small things amulet while we were looting the town, we'll have to beeline our way over to the western side of Prehevel to buy one from Dr. Kiefer's shop. Thankfully, our initial passage through many of the streets of Prehevel is relatively safe, since most of the enemies have a spawn animation when you get too close. For instance, the patchwork enemies at the front of this cafe have to float down from the sky, so we can sprint past them before their hitbox activates. Since we're in the department store, we may as well go to the top floor and have our ears absolutely destroyed by these BDSM guys screaming their lungs out so we can collect the leechmongering for later. Now that we've made it to the shop and purchased our second amulet, we've bypassed the 16 agility breakpoint. From this moment on, outside of some very specific circumstances, we'll now always act first in battle, always have double turns, and always be able to escape. Now that our retreat from every battle is guaranteed, we can equip the Pinecone Pig to passively steal from every enemy that we encounter. This method of farming is relatively inefficient, but infinitely repeatable, so you can abuse it as much as you want. Now that we are super speedy, we can return to the outskirts of the village and start murdering everybody so we can cut their heads off. Our next major progression point is returning to the orphanage, killing the headmaster, and finally using the Hexen for the first time. But once we do use the Hexen to level up, it immediately gets destroyed, so we can only use it once, and we need to have all of our preparations for the skills that we require to be done before we get there. In order to make the best use of this limited opportunity, we have to ensure that we have a healthy amount of soul stones in our pocket, and that we've gained enough influence with our chosen gods before we hit that Hexen. Taking out all the villagers, the moon scorched, a couple of orphans over at the orphanage, and both of the corrupted priests, one in the mayor's manor and the other at the orphanage basement, gives us the soul stones that we'll need. As for God's influence, we started the game with the Skin Bible of Grogroth, and luckily we found the Skin Bible of the God in Fear and Hunger, and those are the two gods that we need influence with. The helpful benefit of using the God of Fear and Hunger's sigil on the Perfection Circle is that it'll summon this totem that allows you to save the game. This will be one of the only ways we can do this within our run. Luckily, there's plenty of opportunities to do so. Using the Grogroth sigil on the asymmetric ritual circle doesn't offer us many benefits outside of cutting our own throat later in the game, but right now we just need the influence. With our preparations complete, we can head back towards the orphanage and finally take on our first boss of the run, the headmaster. On our way through the orphanage, we get stuck in our first oopsie daisies, I'm fucked either waysies situation by getting cornered by this trio of orphans in the classroom. Despite the fact that I'm a super runaway man, I can't get away when I'm stuck between two enemies. This comes up quite a bit in this run, and that's why we need the ability to murder most things by the mid-game. At this point, I'd made too much progress since my last save to bother resetting, so I had to dip into my reserves of murky vials to get myself out of this sticky situation. This is perfect time to explain the murky vial because I'm about to use two of them to murder the naked man next door. For whatever reason, the murky vial is essentially an incendiary grenade that blows up and burns everything in a battle. As you might imagine, this is very helpful, but this item is pretty rare, so using it willy-nilly is not a very good idea. Fortunately, the strategy I'm employing to take out the headmaster only requires 2 of these things, and I had exactly 3 in reserve. The ironic thing about the fight with the headmaster is that this dude specializes in fire magic, and he's about to have his arms and legs melted off with 2 incendiary grenades. The reason this works, despite how counterintuitive it seems, is because this creepy asshole takes his clothes off and sets everything on fire using a Scorched Earth spell in the second turn. Scorched Earth increases the vulnerability fire damage for everyone in a battle by a hell of a lot, so using a fire-based attack like the Murky Vial absolutely wrecks his ass. Let's see how this plays out, shall we? Father Hugo wants to take off his clothes. With this sack of shit dealt with, we can move on to the next phase of the game, the Ascension phase. Since we can access the Hexen table and finally purchase some spells, our combat effectiveness is going to increase dramatically. This is mostly due to the combination of Osar's innate skill Spice Forge and one of the spells from the Grogroth tree, Black Smog. But we'll get into the details of that later. For the time being, we've unlocked Necromancy, Blood Golem, and Black Smog from the Grogroth tree, Le Dance Macabre, Greater Meditation, and Spice Forge from Osar's tree, and Rot and +1 agility from the God and Fear and Hunger's tree. We will unlock further spells from the God of Fear and Hunger and Grogroth later in the run, but for the time being, this is all we'll need. Thanks to the +1 agility from the God and Fear and Hunger's tree, we can now take off one of our Small Things amulet and still be sitting comfortably on 16 agility. Since we're about to start using it a shitload, we better discuss Osar's innate ability Spice Forge and why it makes magic so goddamn ridiculous. You see, Spice Forge gives you 3 separate unique buffs that you can apply to 3 of your spells within your arsenal. The blue spice reduces a spell's mind cost, essentially making some spells free to use. The red spice is essentially a double cast, allowing you to use the spell twice for the cost of using it once. It's very powerful. The white spice, my personal favorite, allows you to activate a spell at the beginning of a battle even if you don't have enough mind to actually use that spell. Naturally, this gets you into a situation where you run out of mind pretty often and you'll gift yourself the debuff Panophobia by reaching 0 mind. Panophobia increases all damage dealt to you by everything in the game, but I honestly couldn't give 2 shits because this strategy is so damn powerful, it's honestly broken. You see, in Fear and Hunger Termina, the majority of enemies will be killed instantly if you manage to lop their head off. This might sound pretty obvious, but it's usually quite the difficult task, as the head has such high evasion that attacking it without breaking the legs is almost completely useless. There is an exception to this rule, however, and it's the use of magic. You see, the head of most enemies has incredibly high physical evasion, but almost dogshit otherworldly or magic evasion. So even the use of a spell like Black Smog, which has an intended purpose of simply blinding an enemy and does very little magic damage, can one-shot a lot of enemies if you scale your magic up to an absurd limit. There's a nice little visual representation of all of the enemies in the game whose head will pop off thanks to Black Smog. Now, Black Smog does have a chance to miss the head on the initial cast when you enter a battle, but this is where our super runaway powers come back into play. We can simply run away from the battle straight away, reinitiate the battle again, and gamble on hitting them in the head with Black Smog. And since you cast Black Smog even if you have 0 mind, this is an infinite loop. On screen is all the enemies that can instantly die when I enter a battle with Black Smog, but this doesn't include all of the other enemies who get absolutely destroyed by having all their limbs ripped off by the spell, or all the bosses who become completely neutered when they're blinded. Okay, let's get back to the run. So in this part of the game, we need to collect these 3 effigies in order to open up the church. We've already collected 2 of them. One is in the White Mold apartments, and the other one was over at the orphanage. There's 2 Moonscorched contestants in these areas, but we'll leave them for later so we can take them all out in order in Phase 3. The 3rd effigy is found at the church itself, but we have to go through the sewers to get to it because that unlocks one of the super bosses later on. There's a pretty nasty boss guarding the sewer entrance to the church, so I decided to put my necromancy skill to good use. Necromancy allows you to raise the dead and add them to your party as meat shields, which is pretty cool, but they're fairly useless in battle. They're really just there to take damage so that you don't have to, and it only works on a couple of enemies in the game. Along with my Blood Golem spell, I now have a full party, which is pretty cool, but it does have a major drawback that I didn't realize until I got into the next encounter. Yeah, so I ran into the Deathmaster stalking the fishing village, and unfortunately, it turns out that having more party members, these shambling ghouls of mine, actually slows down your agility. It gets averaged out for the whole party, so I don't have my super runaway powers. And I ate some shit here. I got my arm cut off. So yeah, that sucks. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, really helpful, guys. Look, I don't need 2 arms to do the rest of this challenge, so whatever. Let's move on. So anyway, back in the sewer, we have to do this little puzzle thing to turn off these waterfalls and move these boxes around and stuff, but ultimately it gives you access to the caverns underneath the church, and this is where our next boss encounter takes place. So the fight against Moonless can be pretty difficult, but luckily Black Smog just blinds her ass, and then she can't really hit me with anything, which is awesome. A major benefit to fighting Moonless is that she's got the black steel katana hanging out of her back, and since we only have 1 arm, that's going to be our weapon of choice for the rest of the run. Old Frank and Andy were pretty damn useless in this fight, so it probably wasn't worth bringing them back to life just to get my arm ripped off, but you know what, they did save my ass in the next fight. The Black Steel Katana is a massive upgrade over our Officer Sword. It has a ridiculously high crit rating, so sometimes you just get insane numbers out of nowhere. Since we're down here, we may as well get ambushed by all of the Ratkin and put Frank and Andy to their intended use. This group of douchebags is actually more dangerous than they seem because they're one of the 6 enemies in the game that have a higher than 10 base agility, so no double turns. They also fall into the category of a group, which means you can't individually target body parts, so you can't just have their heads pop off with black smog. These guys don't have a lot of health, but they are capable of dishing out a lot of damage, so both Frank and Andy eat it in this battle, which I'm actually a little thankful for because they were slowing me down. On our way to the church crypts, we can run into the next electroscope that we have to turn on, and also Tanaka's doppelganger. This is technically the second doppelganger we've run into because we've already taken care of Levi's in the sewer. The doppelgangers are great because cutting their heads off counts as a contestant head, and you can trade those into Pocket Cat for very good items including Books of Enlightenment, which will be our only way to save the game in the very end of this run when we're running around cleaning up all of the enemies, and there's an awful lot of enemies and a lot of distance to cover, so we'll need those books. Now that we've finally made it through to the crypts underneath the church, we can grab the third effigy and make our way through the church basement, fight Rancid the Circle, and make our way to the northern part of town where we can start phase 3. Unfortunately, I did experience a major drama with the recording for this section because somehow the goddamn recording got corrupted, so I had to run this again from a new save, which absolutely sucks ass. So just forgive the fact that Osar grew his arm back for the next several minutes. I did use exactly the same strategies. On our way through the church basement, we do run into one of the Moonscorched contestants, Marina, in her Moonscorched form, Cocoon. This one's pretty damn easy, and it's pretty obvious why. Black Smog just removes every limb except for the Cocoon straight away. So yeah, we just slap Marina's Cocoon until she's dead. Marina's soul has some pretty cool skills associated with it, but we'll leave the amateur tattooing for later on. Our next major encounter is Rancid the Circle, and this guy can be pretty dangerous if you don't have Black Smog. Otherwise, you just blind him and he can't really hit you, and you just focus on ripping off one of his arms because he has a temper tantrum and fucks off. We'll be chasing this guy down to finish him off later on once we enter back into the main timeline of this run, but for the time being, double-armed Osar took this guy down just fine. Now that we've opened up the northern part of town and we can make it to the Donovan's house, the one safe place that has a permanent hexen table, thank God, we can switch back over to our main timeline Osar and just start absolutely kicking ass. Our backup Osar will make one more appearance a bit later on because I also lost the footage of killing Chagnar, Bella's Moonscorched form, but you know what, let's leave that for later. For the time being, we finally have access to a Hexen and we've killed a hell of a lot of enemies, so we can just start blasting out skills left, right, and center. Using the engraved skill we got from Marina's skill tree, we can carve the sigil of the god of fear and hunger onto our face, which increases our agility by 5 points permanently. So now we don't even need a small things amulet, we'll always be at 16 agility, which is awesome. The other two really powerful spells we just unlocked for the skill tree were the Mischief of Rats spell from the God of Fear and Hunger's tree and Black Orb from Grogroth's tree. Mischief of Rats is just as powerful as Black Smog in a lot of situations to use at the beginning of a battle with the Spice Forge. It stuns enemies for up to 2 turns, which in some cases just absolutely ends the battle. As a general rule, if Black Smog isn't effective against an enemy at the beginning of the battle, I'll be using Mischief of Rats instead. Black Orb, on the other hand, is the highest DPS spell in the entire game. It hits 3 times for each cast for a lot of magic damage, and that scales even higher as the battle goes on and La Danse Macabre increases our spell damage. Black Orb, we will almost always have the red spice on, so we can double cast it. It just scales out of control. Since we're entering phase 3 and we're about to start kicking everyone's ass, let's go over some fun cheese strats that I used throughout this run that made things a little easier. So anytime I was low on health and I didn't feel like healing myself, I would go back to the Irrational Obelisk in the clothing store and just slap the shit out of it wearing the Leechmonger ring to top myself off. I left one Moonscorched lady alive in the village so I could constantly rob her with the Pinecone pig and also just regenerate my mind using a Beetlestone ring if I ever needed to. Every now and then I'd revisit Dr. Kiefer's shop and drop all of my pilfered funds on tobacco since it's a really cheap method of regaining your mind whenever you want. And at one point I did also do that strategy where you let needles beat the shit out of you and you lose the battle so you can go back and get touched by the ghost or whatever to lose the panophobia, but then I just gained panophobia right back as soon as I got back to zero mind again, so yeah, not really worth the trouble. Okay, so at this point of the game, there's a couple of things we have to do before we can go and fight the gods. We have to take out all the Moonscorch contestants, all of the bosses, and go and turn on the third teletriscope. Let's do all of the contestants first, because the Western Woods is absolutely bullshit and nightmarish for the rare timer, because it's really poorly designed for Maso mode. The amount of distance you have to run between areas where you can go inside is fucking stupid. Just saying it. Okay, so here's all the contestants in the game. These ones are already dead at the beginning of the Maso mode. You can't fight them. We already killed Marina, so she's out of the picture, but we also killed Levi too, so we'll cycle back to that. That leaves us with Caligura, Dan, Tanaka, Henrique, Abella, Jojo, Karen, Olivia, and Samarie. Let's start with Levi because I killed him when I went to get the effigy before and completely forgot about it. Levi's Moonscorch form, the Weeping Scope, can be found in the rare dimension at the orphanage. He's running around in these trenches, reliving the horrors of war. There's not much to write home about the Weeping Scope, it usually shoots you a ton, but if you hit it with the black smog, even though he doesn't really have a head and it doesn't say he gets blinded, he most certainly does. There's not a lot of strategy for this one, pretty much just slap him across the chest until he ceases to function. I did bring my blood golem with me since many hands make light work, but that's exactly what the Weeping Scope is, light work. Levi has the solitary soul and all of his skills are related to using guns, so completely useless for us. Moving on, we have Jojo's Moonscorched form, the Giant. This guy's found in the rare dimension over at the White Mold Apartments and he's pretty easy, just like Levi. This guy also doesn't technically get blinded by black smog, so instead I hit him with the Mischief of Rats to stun him for the first 2 rounds of battle, and then I just gassed him out with double black smog a couple of times and that finished him off. Jojo has the Tainted Soul and a lot of his skills are really good, particularly the counter stance ability that we're definitely going to need for later. I found out the hard way that you can't cut this guy's head off, it just immediately breaks your bone saw, which is a pretty common element with some of the Moonscorched, but yeah, that sucks. Both Olivia's Moonscorched form, the Mechanical Dance, and Tanaka's Judgment are both found at the museum, so we'll take them out next. The Mechanical Dance can be a real pain in the ass because it constantly vents out poison gas throughout the fight, so you're going to take some damage either way. But using Black Smog does blind her very well, so we shouldn't have to worry about her blades, we just need to kill her before the poison does its thing. I did use my double black orb, hoping that it would smack her in the head and take her out instantly, but unfortunately it randomly attacks a body part, so I just wiped her arms out instead. In hindsight, this one probably would have been easier if I just slashed her across the face from the get-go. Olivia possesses the Shadowed Soul, and a lot of her skills are very powerful, particularly the ones that allow us to create poisons. We're going to put those to good use later on. Tanaka's Moonscorched form, Judgment, is up next. His whole shtick revolves around using broken glass to bleed and blind you. Kind of the same thing that I do. Blindness is really strong against enemies, but it's even stronger against the player. It'll just make my screen go black and I'm basically screwed. I won't be able to see or do anything, so we don't really want to stay in this fight too long. Open up this fight with the Mischief of Rats so we can stun Tanaka for a couple of turns and get our Greater Blood Golem and double Black Smog off. Once that's done, we can just slash at his head until it comes off. Tanaka has the Latent Soul and all of the skills, or I should say buffs, associated with it in the skill tree are absolutely woeful. It's like 1 point of attack, 1 point of defense, bleh. It's all shit, not worth spending the time on. The next target is Caligura down in the sewers with his Moonscorched form, the Monster. This guy was an absolute dick in life, and now he's Moonscorched, he's not much better. All he does is talk about his balls. Mischief of Rats is our opener again for this one, because we want to stun him for a couple of turns so we can charge up our double Black Smog. Monster is really annoying because he's got a lot of hands, and he uses a multi-hit attack really often. Otherwise, every turn he's just going to puke on you. Couple of charges of the double Black Smog along with the Dance Macabre increasing our magic damage as the battle goes on shreds his arms so we can just focus on slapping him in the chest. Black Orb has a lot of value in this fight since it is quite long and will be fully charged up by the time we need to use it. Caligura has the Decrepit Soul, which doesn't have any skills that are really useful to us besides Steel, and that's only really going to get us a Soul Stone here or there. The next contestant on the list is Sam Marie and her Moonscorched form Dysmorphia. Dysmorphia can be found in the Church Crypt in the Rare Dimension. She is also a magic user, which makes her very dangerous. Magic doesn't work the same way as all the other physical attacks in the game. For whatever reason, the accuracy debuff from the user being blinded doesn't matter at all. Dysmorphia can use the spell Hurting with both hands per turn, and that spell has a really high chance of taking my limbs off. We open up this fight with the Mischief of Rats just to stun her for a couple of turns so we can start charging our double black smog and remove her limbs before they become a problem. Samarie has the Radiating Soul, which does have some helpful skills. They basically just work as free ways to get influence with Sylvian and Grogoroth, which I will need. The Sylvian influence in particular is very helpful because we'll need that to unlock the Pheromone spell later on. Backtracking now to the Mayor's Manor, it's time to take down Henrique's Moonscorched form, the Gentleman. The Gentleman's a pretty early Moonscorched enemy that you can run into, so he's not exactly very difficult. I left him this far into the run to come back to because I really wanted to have the ability to steal the meat pie and vegetable pie off him during this fight. These two items have passive buffs, which are really great. We can make them later after we actually kill Henrique, but the ingredients are RNG, so I just want to make sure that I had these. A couple of smogs and slaps gets this guy done, not really much to write home about. Henrique possesses the Suffocated Soul, which does have some good skills. Melee Proficiency and Master Chef are very helpful. The Melee Proficiency in particular gives you an extra 30% hit rate for melee weapons, which makes Counter Stance that we stole from JoJo very strong. Since we're in the neighborhood, let's take a leisurely paddle over to the Silent Hill Island to go find our next contestant. Karen and her Moonscorched form, the Valkyrie, are hanging out over here doing some sightseeing for some reason. Unlike the Gentleman, the Valkyrie is a very dangerous encounter, and you need to make sure that you're blinding her immediately, because she'll attack you twice on the first turn. Besides her double claw attack, the Valkyrie also has a lot of bell ends hanging out in her wings that'll take turns throwing spears at you. You can end up dead really quick in this fight if you're not careful, so using Black Smog repeatedly to make sure that everyone is blinded is imperative. Since at this point in the game my magic scaling is out of control thanks to 3 Chick-Chacks and the Death Mask in my inventory, I can just blast Valkyrie with Black Smog until I get rid of her claws and all the bell ends. Once the claws and bell ends are dealt with, it's just simply a matter of slapping her across the chest with my sword until she finally goes away. Karen has the Endless Soul, and its skills are honestly not useful for me in this part of the game. I already have an answer for everything she can do. Lockpicking, escaping, diplomacy, whatever. Now the second to last contestant is Abella and her Moonscorched form Targna, but that footage got corrupted as I mentioned earlier. So now we've got our stand-in, the sad both arms intact Osar, to show that one off. Now, a supercharged murder god, Osar, in the main timeline, absolutely wrecked Chagna's shit in like 2 turns, but sad 2-armed Osar couldn't pull that one off at this point in the game. There really isn't a strategy for this fight anyway. It essentially just comes down to hitting her with Black Smog at the opening of the battle and then just slapping her in the chest until she dies. Not very exciting, I know, but you know what, that's just how it goes sometimes. Abella has the Caressing Soul, which has some really cool early game skills that can do some cool stuff, like creating weapons and opening up doors, but I don't really need any of that at this point. The last Moonscorch contestant is Dan, and he's actually turned into the Pocket Cat at this point. So I did leave him till much later in the run because I needed to use his shop. But hey, let's keep things consistent, let's just kill him now. Pocket Cat's whole deal is that he rips your limbs off every turn. He asks you which limb you want him to rip off, and then he goes and tries to do that. You can still blind him with Black Smog, but it's not as consistent as I'd like. As an additional safety net, I'm wearing the Fluted Armor set, which stops dismemberment outright. We're wearing our Yugetsu amulet, which increases our crit chance because we're just going to slash at his face. He doesn't have any evasion on the head, and that's the easiest way to kill him. Dan has the Blank Soul, and it's got a lot of really cool medical skills associated with it, but at this point in the game, I probably don't need it. just nice to have. Thanks, Dan. Alright, well, with all the contestants dead, this is what the Hexen looks like now. We have all these skill trees unlocked, which is great, but a fair few of the contestants have skills that are just completely unnecessary for us. We will buy all of Henrique's, all of Marina's, all of Saint-Marie's, all of JoJo's, besides Perfect Guard, and hell, we might even buy Tanaka's, why not? We did use Saint-Marie's ability on the Sylvian ritual circle back at the orphanage to get some Sylvian influence so we can purchase pheromones. We'll need that in a minute. And yeah, let's move on to the Western Woods. Alright, so getting to this place is an absolute nightmare. It is not very well balanced for Maso mode, in my opinion. There is so much distance to cover and not that many places to hide to reset your rare timer. There is a couple of guys we can kill along the way, which will reset the timer, but that doesn't exactly help us get back. Anyway, here's a nice little visual guide so we can get on the same page with this. So I need to get all the way over here to this bunker that's hidden in the woods. My starting point is the apartment in the middle of town here. Now along the way, there is a manhole cover in this area, and there is a tent in the woods over here. I can use both of these to reset the timer, so there's 2 saving graces, but between the starting point and end point, there's like 8 screens, maybe more. So this is the route that I'll have to take. Along the way, there's pitfall traps that instantly kill you in the forest. There's landmines all over that part of goddamn town. And we'll most likely run into the roaming boss, the mob. But we kind of need the mob in order to get all the way over there. This is the area of the game where I had the most resets, and it's not even due to the goddamn battles, it's just instantly getting killed by falling into a pitfall trap, not seeing a fucking landmine, or you get zapped by the moon. It's so frustrating, it's just ridiculous. Okay, so as predicted, we run into the mob on the way to the forest. We've actually managed to avoid these guys up to this point, which is pretty impressive. But they're overdue to die, so let's get rid of them. This is another one of those fights where all the guys are considered a group. You can't individually target body parts, which is really annoying. So no black smog to pop their heads off, even though individually it would work. They can still be blinded though, so that's pretty clutch. That means black smog is our first move. The guy in the middle with the bench grinder is the biggest problem, and unique to this fight, if you cast rot on him, he just completely changes into a different person and loses the bench grinder, so that's super helpful. Otherwise, our only strategy is just to black orb the shit out of these guys. They have really high health for no apparent reason, so we just need the DPS to get rid of them. The mob is one of those encounters that definitely ends a lot of early runs if you're not prepared, since these guys show up in a lot of places, but this late in the run, they don't even touch me. Funnily enough, there's a beekeeper in this area that I've been kiting around just in case I need to kill him and reset my timer. I'm just using the enemies as tools at this point because this goddamn run is stupid. Once we enter the forest, we can run into Olivia's doppelganger, but killing her doesn't reset the timer, it's some kind of glitch. Instead, we have to seek out these little forest boys and just pop their heads off whenever we need a respite from the goddamn moon. Once we had made it to the tent in the middle of the forest, I definitely used a Book of Enlightenment to make a safety save here, because this whole area sucks. I should also mention that the first time I ran through and did this, I didn't realize that there's an exclusive Maso mode boss camping your way back to town. So yeah, now I understand why no one does this on Maso mode. Right before we get into the bunker is the next boss that we're going to take out. This is the Centaur. It's a boss that most people just avoid because it's a pain in the ass and it doesn't give you anything. The Centaur likes to sprint at you and slap you with all of its legs and run you down and stuff. It's not very fun, it hits really hard, but it does get blinded by black smog pretty easy, so you know where this is going. This guy has 2 heads and a lot of limbs, you just have to start working him down. Popping the heads off will make them explode and vomit poison all over you, so this guy's just fun. He's full of surprises. I don't think I've ever bothered to kill the Centaur in any run that I've done of this game, so this was a new experience for me. Now that we've made it to the Tunnel 1 bunker, there's really only 2 enemies to worry about down here before we turn on the telectroscope, and neither one of them are really a problem. So Dan's dead wife Stitches is down here making human centipedes, but she's not much of a problem because her head pops off with black smog. Turns out the actual problem is the weird goo thing that she makes, because this guy's just annoying. Tons of health, can't blind him, just a pain in my ass. Anyway, now that we've activated the last telescope, we can make our way into the white bunker and fight Logic, which is awesome. So we're all set up to start taking out all of the bosses, and let's start with one of the hardest Maso mode exclusives because it's in the goddamn way back to town. So I'm referring to the Maso mode exclusive platoon boss. This guy camps the only entrance on the way back into town, and he sticks you in a goddamn cinematic so you can't just run around him or anything. This guy comes out of absolutely nowhere, and you need to have so much preparation in place to beat him. It's just fucking ridiculous. If you didn't know this guy existed, you're dead. You're just going to be sitting there thinking, what the fuck was that? And I did this giant run around in this really ridiculous area just to get smoked by this guy. So what's the strat for this one? Well, I lifted it straight from Dark Raccoon. So thanks a lot, man. That was really helpful. So this strat is a combination of melee, magic, and poison to try to get this guy killed as fast as possible. In order to survive this guy's one-shot attacks, because he just does like 200 damage if he shoots you with that cannon, I'm rocking the Hardened Heart, the Leechmonger Ring, and I'm using JoJo's Counter Stance. The Hardened Heart makes sure that you always survive an attack with 1 health as long as you have more than 1 health. The Counter Stance makes you attack anytime you get attacked, and the Leechmonger Ring heals you for any damage that you deal. So I get shot with a cannon, I get on 1 health, I slap him back with Counter Stance, I get like 4 health, and now I'm on 5. Next time he attacks me, I'll go back to 1 health. I've also created some condensed hemlock that I'm going to throw on his body, which will inflict him with Toxic. This is one of the skills that we stole from Olivia when we murdered her. Toxic is ridiculously powerful, but it's going to take a couple of turns to wipe this guy out, so in the meantime, I'm just going to use double black orb and just try to survive. The ridiculous thing about this enemy is he's just an upgraded version of an enemy that you fight later on your way to one of the endings. So sticking him here, giving him resistance to everything but toxic, incredible health, higher than some of the endgame bosses, is just a big screw you to the player. Just for comparison, Rare, the Moon God, has 6,500 HP. This guy has 7,000 HP on his body. He's also got 4,000 on the cannon and 3,000 for each arm. Plus, Rare doesn't have the ability to one-shot you unless you're in a really specific circumstance with zero mind. This dude is just like, hey, I'm gonna do that every turn. Ha 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 ha. I did forget to mention, but at the beginning of this fight, I did have to shoot up some H because for whatever reason, this game has a really positive relationship with narcotics and it buffs all your stats. So eventually this guy dies, which is awesome. The toxic finally takes effect and we actually win. So now we can move on and start wiping out all the other bosses and all of the enemies before we go down our ending path. So yeah, let's start jumping around to some of these bosses. I didn't fight these guys in the same order that you're seeing them. This is just for consistency, but yeah. So first up is our rematch with Rancid the Sergal. This guy took off from the church and started harassing nature gods for some reason. Maybe he wanted to fight something he could actually beat for a change. This rematch plays out pretty much exactly the same as the first time around, except I hit him with Mischief of Rats to start with because I accidentally still had that on my Spice Forge. A bit of blind, and then taking off that other arm really pisses Rancid off, and then we just harass him until his head falls off. It's pretty funny. Chasing Rancid around really only has the benefit of getting his Sergal spears, but you need 2 hands to use them, so whatever. Next up is our skinless pal from the first game, the Tormented One. He's pretty cool. He's got like this new chains look. It's kinda, it's very Xenobite-y. For whatever reason, Old Boy can be stunned and blinded pretty easily, despite the fact that it looks like he doesn't have eyes. After I used Mischief of Rats to start the battle, it came up and said Needles has lost his balance, which surely that's a glitch. I don't know. His head was also vulnerable from the beginning of the fight, so I slashed at that, but I think that was just a bait, because his body has way less health than his head does. If I had landed those 2 crits on his chest, then he would have been dead in 1 turn. Oh well. Very cool design for Chambara, but not very difficult, so sorry pal. Next on the hit list is the other new god, the Heartless One. This lass is considered to be a very difficult super boss, maybe even the hardest one in the game. A lot of the strategies I could find online was so specific to having certain items and weapons, one of them being the bench grinder, which I don't have, so I'm gonna do the next best thing. The whole deal with old Heartless is that she absolutely speed blitzes the living shit out of you. That's her thing. So you have to make sure that you drop a bunch of dots on her really early on so that they'll eat up all of her health really quick, because surviving more than like 3 rounds is nearly impossible. So going into this fight, I've dropped every buff that I have available to me. Pep pills, some H, all those yummy pies that we got from Henrique. Anything that'll buff our stats and keep us alive for at least 1 extra turn. Starting the fight, we throw pheromones onto our blood golem so that Heartless will target him for at least the first turn. He doesn't survive very long, and you'll see why. After that, we're going to throw down our counter stance because we're doing the whole hardened heart leechmonger thing again, but there's so many multi-attacks from the Heartless one that we can't rely on it. She'll just blow straight through and kill us. As for dots, I'm going to throw the condensed hemlock to get toxic on the chest, and I also use the poison tip skill to lace my katana with poison. So poison and toxic, it's usually pretty good. A lot of strats online say drop at least 3 dots onto her, but that's usually a bench grinder thing, inflicting bleed or throwing down some fire, and I just didn't have the time for that, but you know what, it seemed to work out okay. I did also equip Nishra's shriveled head for this fight because it has the off chance of reflecting some spells. It's not super helpful, but it did actually work, which is pretty funny. But yeah, that's all the prep, so I'll let the rest of the fight play out. Yeah, I was a little confused when all of her limbs disappeared and everything seemed to melt off, but she was still alive. That was, yeah. I mean, that's happened to me before, but I haven't fought this enemy in so long that it was a little surprising. Okay, so the next one I bet you didn't see coming, the Irrational Obelisk. Yeah, so if you're familiar with this game, you'll know this thing has 999,000 HP. There's no real point in fighting it. It doesn't move. It can't really die. You win the battle and get spat out, but then it's still there. So why would you fight it? Well, because I felt like it. Did it take 30 minutes? Yes, it did. Was it worth doing? No, it wasn't. But, you know, got him. Okay, it's that fun time where we have to go cleaning up the streets of all the enemies we ran past before. Luckily, there's only a few that really fall into this category, mostly knobheads, these death mask guys, a few inquisitors, a couple of bobbies here and there, just people that I kind of forgot about. Thankfully, Mischief of Rats in the White Spice and Double Black Smog does take care of most things. Thankfully, I did the majority of my cleaning before this point in the game because I'm addicted to a certain substance now and I had to use a couple. These Cthulhu guys is an interesting example. So a lot of the chatter on the internet says avoid these guys. They'll mind control you if you're alone and you'll just slice yourself to pieces. Yeah, well, that doesn't happen if you don't have a weapon. Instead, you do nothing and then just wait until you're not mind controlled anymore. Pretty lame trick, really. You don't even get to steal their head because it's a snail. Okay, so after all the cleaning up, we have 28 more heads for the Hexen table. Yay! Of course, at this point in the game, it's pretty much useless. We're just doing it to do it. I don't need any of these skills, but whatever. Whoa, look how much the Hexen table's filled in. Wow. Looks like they were wrapping up this run with about 50 skills. Pretty cool. About half of those are useless. But you know what? We did it. Okay, well, with everything dead now, we're ready to take on our gods. Let's start with Rare because that's pretty straightforward. You just go to the top of the tower and you kill Percolate, and then you kill Rare and you're done. Going through the white bunker and taking on Logic, that's like a big, I guess you could say, boss gauntlet thing. We'll do that next. So prepping for Rare's pretty straightforward. We're just going full magic. All chick chacks, all of the buffs, drop them all, do some hate, cheats and pels, whatever. Take everything. I also put poison tip on my sword. I've got blood golem in the white spice and our black orb in the red spice. So we can have blood golem up straight away and we can have double black orbs kicking everyone's ass. So this is technically a two-stage boss fight. You fight Percolate first, and then immediately afterwards you fight Rare when he comes down from the stratosphere and says hello. Our main priority at the beginning of both fights is to drop our pheromones on our blood golem so he can eat most of the comets and the feathers and whatever they're going to throw at us. And while that's happening, we're going to drop some toxic hemlock on his chest, and then we're going to slice at it with our poisoned katana. Percolate's whole deal is reflecting magic, so we're not going to do any of that, idiot. And as for Rare, we're just going to drop double black orbs all over his ass until he gives us back Majora's Mask. Pretty easy. There's one really funny glitch that I had to research after this fight, but it turns out that Rancid the Sergal and Rare share some code. So if you break Rancid's limbs, you actually destroy some of Rare's eyes before the final boss fight. Who knew? I'm going to cut out some of the menuing in the next two battles because I got distracted and I had to walk away a couple of times, and yeah, that's boring. There's not much else to say, so let's just let the drug-addled dancing man take it from here. Well, that second coin flip was pretty lucky. I probably could have avoided that if I just restored my mind like a turn earlier, but whatever. That's ending B out of the way. Let's go get ending A. So if you haven't done this ending before, you have to go back into the museum, do this little clock puzzle, and it reveals this giant hole in the ground. This leads you down to the white bunker. The bunker door won't open unless you've turned on the 3 telescopes across the game, so that's why we did that earlier. Once you're in here, the vault doors lock and you're locked into this route. The bunker is filled with Bremen elite guards, one with a rifle and the other variation with a flamethrower, but you take them out the same. Just hit them with the mischief of rats, bring up your blood golem, throw some pheromones on him, and then just smack him. As we make our way through the bunker, we'll eventually find this Sylvian trooper that's beckoning us to go into the darkness, and that's when we get attacked by the platoon. The normal one, that's way easier than that other stupid one on the west side of town. This next fight is actually going to lead into another 3 fights because the Gull Bros never rocked up when I was running around. They're really hard to spawn, but they jump in directly after this fight, and then there's another boss fight, and then there's Logic, which is a 2-phase boss fight. So yeah, lots of boss fights. Let's drop all of our buffs now. Thankfully, we will have time to change our gear around between these fights, so that's not so bad. The regular platoon is so much simpler than his Maso mode exclusive counterpart, it's almost hilarious, but we will be using the similar strategy that we did for him. So hardened heart, counter stance, and a bit of black orb action. We won't need any toxic for this guy, but we've put poison tip on our weapon because why not? After we drop pheromones on our blood golem, we just want to take out the Sylvian trooper by slashing at her a bit. The platoon will get confused and won't shoot us for a little while, so we can just start using black orb and just smashing him around. Since this platoon doesn't attack us with his arms, he only attacks once per turn, it's really not so bad. So if you haven't run into the Gold Bros earlier in the game, because they can roam around and show up in places, they'll show up here, directly after this fight they just wander in. Just like the mob, these guys are really dangerous in the early to mid game because they're kind of wandering around, they just catch you off guard, but at the end of the game, they're pretty woeful. These guys are really susceptible to being blinded, and once they're blinded, they almost never hit anything, so yeah, blind them in the first turn, and then just crack them with the sword until they're dead. Just like Rancid the Sergal, there's no real point in killing these guys unless you want their cool weapon, but it's two-handed, so... After a quick stroll through the retirement village for lame gods, it's on to our next boss fight. So sitting in the dark like a loner, we find Kaiser, or the Yellow King, or Legard, or Griffith, or whatever you want to call him. He's all mopey and brooding in the dark because he couldn't become a super cool old god, he had to just make one. The Kaiser has a couple of tricks up his sleeve, but most of it just comes down to the fact that his Asterix is really fast, it has 20 agility, and it'll attack you twice if you don't have high enough agility. Otherwise, the strategy comes down to this: cut his head off. He's got almost no evasion on his head, and if we land some crits with our Yugetsu amulet and our black steel, we'll end him pretty damn fast. I did also pop on counter stance since it has a pretty good chance of taking out the Asterix, honestly, since that thing attacks you so often. But yeah, for someone trying to aspire to be an old god, this guy's a bit of a joke. I mean, what's he done in the last, I don't know, 500 years? He got a snake and a floating piece of the alphabet? Whoa, bro, that's cool. Alright, so we're up to the final boss of this run, and arguably the hardest on paper, Logic. So this fight's a little interesting. It's clearly supposed to take a really long time because she's got almost 20,000 HP, and by turn 12, the second phase begins, and it's all scary and woo. But 12 turns is a really long time, and I don't intend to let her live for that long. Logic is immune to pretty much everything but getting burnt, and she obviously doesn't like getting slashed or smacked around with a magic orb, so that's going to be our deal. To prepare for this one, we're going to use all the buffs we possibly have. We're going to put on some chick-chacks, but keep the beetle stone so we can regenerate some mind each turn. As for our spices, we're going to have the white spice on our blood golem to get it off round 1, red spice on our black orb to double cast that, and blue on black smog since we'll use that pretty often as well. Alright, so I'm going to cut down on some of the menuing in this fight since it is so long, but otherwise, go get 'em, you one-armed bandit. Well, there you have it. Not too bad. Bit of slap and tickle from the dancing man. In retrospect, the hardest part of this entire run is definitely the rare timer, getting stuck between enemies, and just the lack of opportunities to save. But otherwise, this game really isn't that bad. The power curve gets so out of control so quickly, it's honestly hilarious. There's a couple of curveballs here and there, and some of the instant death stuff is super cheap, but otherwise, yeah, not that bad. Hey, if you're still around at the end of this video, thank you very much. That helps me out a lot. I put a lot of time into these stupid challenge runs, clearly killing everything. Like this is such a time poor exercise, so I'm glad that you hung around. For everyone that joined the newly established channel membership, thank you very much, Cheeseboard. I only just kicked off the membership, so I'm gonna start doing some shout outs in every video, so here we go. Big thanks to Fox7878, Siver Me Timbers 307, Coco Fang Rocks, Mirror Ready 8691, Void Angel 6895, Mighty Mao, James Art Dump Gallery, Sky Winters ZW, JG Bubbles 21, Julius Seether, Goose Donks 316, Gatus 853, Sparks 7071, Yormangander 9919, Swarman Seagull, Your Boy Nate, Skies 1521, Jerry the Gremlin 7159, Lavish Peasant Boyd, Jojo Cat the Fur, Tech Analogy, Kalika Gamers, Yo Yorders 9855, Brian the Normal 1888, Pickles the Beastfly, The Palafin Guy, Censored VOW, J-Bit Lowsec, One Piece is the best, Dresky 9361, Nope Chuck Tester 4706, Sliver of Nope, Sam Kid 123, Super Deathlord 12, Stifling Lattice, Batos Z Bobinski 7520, Lord Kagai 2668, Rays 398, So It Goes, Luzvel Machiavello, Kobold Production, Michael CNC 2564, Dalton Hosafina 1034, Ko Jackajar 6451, Phantom Wales, Shogun 9598, Marcus X23, Alan Marshall, Sazdek 23, The Last Web Dev, Aquafroof, and Die Spectre 9991. Jesus, that's 52 members already. Holy hell. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you had a good time. Hope you're doing well. See you in the next one.
Who keeps saying Cheeseman?